In the suburbs, Nick and his wife Maggie live happily with their children Isla and Max. One morning, Maggie has a heart attack and is hospitalized. She has been there for several days waiting for a heart transplant. Working and taking care of the children makes life difficult for Nick. One evening, he takes the kids to a presentation by Cobalt Industries and they see the Sims, advanced robots that can help humans with everyday tasks or even difficult tasks. Nick begins to consider buying one and hears all the details from the seller, who promises that the Sim will adapt to the owner's needs. While Nick is distracted, Isla walks away alone. Nick panics when he recognizes her, but luckily a Sim named Alice brings her back. Alice offers to look after Isla while Nick goes shopping and she even makes a joke, which surprises him. The seller explains that Alice is the latest model with the most sophisticated AI, allowing Sims to mimic human emotions. This makes them especially good with children and Isla wants her. The next morning, Nick struggles to feed the kids and deal with an important call from work. Just then, Alice arrives and immediately gets to work, asking about the family's schedule while noticing the messy house and loose stair railings. After Nick leaves to take the kids to school, Alice absorbs the smart refrigerator's shopping list in a flash and begins cleaning the house, noticing a digital photo frame showing the family with Maggie. At the end of the day, the family returns to a clean house and dinner ready. However, Isla complains about the lasagna because it tastes different from her mother's. Suddenly, Max started crying and Alice offered to hold him so he wouldn't be a bother during dinner, but Nick chose to put the baby in his arms and just told Alice to get Max's bath ready. As the night wore on, Alice went to sleep and leaned against the wall. Isla sneaked out of the room and climbed onto a chair to get the cookie jar but slipped and fell. Nick heard the jar fall and his daughter scream, so he ran downstairs. Luckily, Alice caught up to Isla and the baby was unharmed. The glasses injured Alice and Nick was shocked to see her bleeding. After putting Isla to bed, Nick went to check on Alice and found her in her underwear. He asked her if she needed to go to the repair shop, but Alice used a special bandage to close the cut immediately. Sometime later, the family visited Maggie and Isla told them that Alice had become her friend. Nick became very fond of Maggie because he missed her so much. When Nick returns to work at the construction site, he and his co-workers find their boss directing the location to a representative from a robotics company. Becoming suspicious, Nick talks to his boss in the elevator and confirms the sad truth. Workers are being laid off and replaced by Sims because of construction delays. Nick is not fired because insurance requires a human foreman on site, but he angrily stops the elevator and announces that he is leaving with his friends to help out. But he changes his mind when his boss points out that he needs the money for the kids and the hospital bills, especially since Maggie is no longer working. When Nick returns home, he drops the overdue bills on the floor and takes care of his children. Alice picked up the envelopes and noticed that Nick was very tired, but he listened to Isla and tried to comfort Max, who was crying. After dinner, Nick worked on his car while drinking and listening to metal music. Suddenly, Alice changes the music to something quieter and points out that Nick didn't eat much for dinner, so he explains that he had a bad day at work. Alice listens to him in a friendly manner and Nick complains about what happened, causing Alice to call him a hypocrite for hiring a Sim instead of a human. Alice then helps Isla get ready for bed. Isla asks if her mother is dying and Alice tries to distract her by shining a UV light in her mouth. She then joins Nick in the living room, where he is watching Casablanca. She knows the story from the database, but Nick explains that watching it is actually a different experience and asks her to erase everything she knows about the film from her memory. Alice explains that her intelligence comes from her memory and that removing it would be counterproductive, but Nick tells her to do it anyway. She has to reboot her programming to do this, so Nick holds the power button on her neck for 7 seconds. Alice then explores the film for the first time and discovers a love so strong that a person will do evil to protect it. The film is interrupted by a call from Maggie, who announces that they have found a heart and therefore the surgery has been scheduled. The next day, the family goes to the hospital and Maggie asks for a minute alone with Alice. Maggie worries that Nick is spending too much time with the kids and not taking care of himself, so she wants Alice to keep Nick happy even if she has to do things he doesn't like getting rid of the alcohol he's been hiding in the garage. A few minutes later, the doctor delivers the bad news. A storm prevented the helicopter from delivering the heart to the hospital, so the surgery was canceled. Nick tries to comfort Maggie, but she wants to be alone for now. Later at home, Nick continues to drink and recounts what happened. He started to lose control and tried to throw the bottle, but Alice stopped him by grabbing his arm. Nick was shocked to feel the pulse in his wrist, so Alice explained that she had an artificial heart because the sound of a heartbeat was comforting to a baby. She then put her hand down his pants and started to pleasure him while describing how his pulse and veins responded. Alice didn't want him to suffer anymore, and at first Nick liked it, but soon he recoiled and pushed her away. Nick then ran off to clear his head, but he couldn't help but imagine what it would be like for Alice. Later, at the hospital, Maggie begins listing a series of pieces of advice she wants Nick to pass on to their children, clearly starting to lose hope. That night, Nick notices that the photos with Maggie have disappeared from the digital frame and confronts Alice about it. She explains that she took down the photos of Maggie because they upset Isla, but she immediately put them back up when Nick tells her. Later, Nick goes out drinking with his colleagues from work. The group is frustrated that they are having trouble finding work as most companies hire Sims. When the robot waitress comes to their table, Monty is rude to her, and Nick disapproves. The group then leaves the bar and continues drinking in the car. Monty announces that they're going to have fun and takes them to the construction site, claiming that he left some tools behind and that no one answered the phone when he tried to ask for them. Nick reminds him that the area is patrolled, but Monty ignores him and the rest of the group follows him. Monty finds the storage bin where they keep Sims workers, but the lock requires a password. Nick refuses to open it for them, but Monty guesses that he has his own code and he chose the year Isla was born. His guess is correct, and inside the container he finds a group of workers who look alike. The main Sim explains that they have no names, only numbers. Monty begins praising the cold and impersonal companies, then he starts to kill Sims with a tool. Nick tries to stop him, but the others hold him back. When Nick gets home, he takes a shower to wash off Sim's blood. Suddenly, Alice appears with a towel and Nick notices that she is wearing Maggie's bathrobe. Alice explains that Maggie's scent seems to calm Max down, and when Nick asks her to take it off, she immediately does so. Feeling worried, Nick tries to leave, but Alice stops him and takes off his towel before making him sit down. When she climbs onto his lap, Nick tries to say that he can't do it, so Alice blindfolds him and changes her voice to sound like Maggie's. Now Nick can indulge in the illusion and pretend to sleep with his wife. The next morning, Nick wakes up with regret and tells Alice that they can't do this anymore. She tries to tell him that her stress has subsided, but Nick scolds her, explaining that it's not about need but about connection and love. When Nick gets to work, his boss has spoken to the police because all the Sims have been destroyed. Nick is suspicious because his code was used, so he tells them that he was at the hospital with Maggie and that his code is Isla's birthdate so any of his friends could guess. The boss is not convinced and threatens to fire Nick if he lies. Soon after, Nick gets a call from Maggie, who is excited that they finally found another heart. She is then taken to the operating room where all the Sim surgeons are. Luckily, the transplant is a success, and within a few days, Maggie is sent home. Her body is still weak and she has trouble getting down to pick up Max, so Alice steps in to pick him up. Later, Alice takes Max to the park and sees a spoiled brat scolding her babysitter Sim, which causes Max to cry. Alice scolds the child with rude words, and all the Sims in the neighborhood are in disbelief, thinking that her master has lowered her politeness so much. However, Alice explains that she actually removed politeness from her database thanks to Nick's reset and claims that it was for the best. That night, Isla happily eats Maggie's lasagna and Alice asks for the recipe, but Maggie says it's a family secret. Maggie feels unwell and decides to rest instead of eating. In the morning, Maggie wakes up to find Isla screaming stop and running down the stairs, but the railing breaks and she falls. Alice stops tickling Isla and picks Maggie up and carries her to her room. When Nick comes home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla in Maggie's voice and asking her to stop. Alice mentions Maggie's fall and Nick runs to check on her while Alice tells him that the railing broke. This makes Nick suspicious because Alice should have fixed that ramp. Hours later, Nick wakes Maggie and leads her down a candlelit path to the garden where he has prepared a romantic dinner for just the two of them. Alice watches them through the window, jealous. After dinner, the couple showers and gets into the dirty bed. Nick doesn't want to hurt Maggie, so instead of going in, he uses his mouth. Their special moment is interrupted by Alice, who says Isla had a nightmare and asks to see Nick. After taking care of Isla, Nick went out to clean up the garden. Shortly after, Monty appeared with a few drinks and apologized for the night before when he told him his wife had left him. He also revealed that the police had questioned him and their boss had filed a complaint for trespassing and vandalism. Monty believes that Nick reported him to keep his job, and an argument ensues where Monty yells a lot and ends up hitting Nick. As Nick tackles him, Monty quickly overpowers him and starts kicking him. Monty grabs a bottle to finish him off but is stopped by Alice, who breaks the glass and injures Monty's hand before sending him flying. She is ready to do more, but Nick stops her. Before leaving, Monty tells Nick that he has until tomorrow to convince his boss to drop the charges or he will take him away. French Nick then mentions that Sims are not allowed to hurt others, but Alice explains that she is programmed to protect her master. She starts talking to Nick about what her life would be like if Maggie died, and he replies that she would never be Maggie because she doesn't even have scars. Alice takes a piece of glass and points out that she can add more if he wants. Meanwhile, Monty is at home drinking happiness powder and leaving crying messages on his ex-wife's voicemail while holding a gun. Just then, Alice comes in and says that Nick doesn't know she's there and she can't let him lose his job. Monty began to yell at Sims and insult him, preparing to shoot him. However, Alice was faster and blocked his hand before throwing him to the ground and knocking the gun away. When Monty tried to fight back, Alice pushed him through the wall and grabbed the gun to kill him. Suddenly, she was stopped by Sims, who Alice felt sorry for but was still shot. Alice then killed Monty as well. The next day, Nick goes to work and tries to convince his boss to drop the charges, but he learns that Monty is dead. At home, Maggie gets dizzy while trying to pick up a book and Alice does it for her. Maggie wants to take a peaceful bath, but Alice refuses to leave because she is afraid she will drown. She explains that Maggie is causing stress for the whole family, especially because she cannot meet Nick's physical needs. When Maggie asks how she knows this, Alice tells her that she knows what Nick's vital signs look like when he is satisfied and that her sensors have not detected it since Maggie returned. Furious, Maggie sends Alice to the garage. A while later, Nick comes home and Maggie is waiting for him, forcing him to tell the truth. Nick admits that he did it once to Alice and an argument ensues with a lot of screaming which Alice hears when she hits the window. Max starts crying and Alice goes to check on him and decides that he is a burden. She puts him in the bathtub and starts filling it with water, which Isla sees. The girl alerts her parents and they rush into the bathroom, but Alice has already closed the door. As Nick began to bang on the door with the lamp, Maggie climbed through the window and across the roof to the bathroom. She tried to grab the baby, but Alice pushed her against the wall. At that point, Nick finally rushed in and pulled Max out of the tub, passing him to Isla before hitting Alice with the lamp to free his wife. Alice soon stood up with a severe facial injury and blocked the lamp as Nick tried to hit her again. Maggie told Nick to let go and plugged in the lamp, electrocuting Alice. She passes out and the house loses power. An ambulance picks Max up from the hospital while a company technician asks if there were any signs of Alice malfunctioning. Nick apologizes to Maggie, who explains that she needs space and leaves with the kids. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to a repair shop where a technician cuts open her head. The other worker notices Alice's hand moving, but it stops when her memory is erased. They connect it to the computer and notice the code has flaws everywhere. Suddenly, the screen starts flashing and a message appears saying that a download is in progress, meaning Alice is taking over. The technicians remove the memory, but Alice is already in the system, so they unplug the computer. However, another message appears asking how to get rid of what's in your head, and suddenly one of the technicians is killed by Alice 2, a sim that the original Alice threw her memories into. Alice 2 then ignores the other technician's orders and repeatedly bangs her head on the floor before turning to face the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick is drinking at the bar and fires the bartender for being a sim. Suddenly, Alice arrives, speaking ill of her still injured face. She explains that her job is to make Nick happy and admits that she killed Monty before saying that she is also in the hospital. Nick tries to leave, but Alice holds him back and looks at the bartender to make him freeze. As he complains about his mistakes, Nick pretends to lightly touch Alice's head to erase her memory. After closing the door, he runs away. At the hospital, the doctor confirms that Max is fine, but Maggie is uneasy because he is a sim. Isla then hears her mother's voice and follows her as the lights change. The doctor freezes and there are broken bottles on the floor, but before Isla can follow the voice again, Maggie drags her away. It turns out that the voice is Alice 2, who is trying to access the computer and is seen by a nurse. Alice 2 grabs her by the neck to strangle her to death and steals her keycard while Maggie and Isla run away. Alice 2 then uses the keycard to find Max's room in the system. Suddenly, Maggie accidentally steps on the glass, but she tries not to scream. Maggie and Isla then join Max and take him away just before Alice 2 enters the room. However, Maggie's wound leaks onto the floor and Alice 2 uses her UV light to track it. When she finds the family, they use a fire extinguisher to distract her and run away. They forget Maggie's phone, so Nick's calls are missed, but he continues to drive like crazy. Soon, Maggie and the kids find their way outside where the other Sims are frozen. Maggie takes their key card and gets into the ambulance, but Alice 2 jams the engine when she tears the door open. She then throws Maggie onto the roof of the car and admits that she wishes Nick loved her as much as he loves Maggie. Alice 2 grabs Maggie by the neck and digs her fingernails into her surgical scar, but she is interrupted by Nick's arrival. Maggie kicks Alice 2 and Nick runs her over with his car before crashing into her. As the car catches fire, Maggie rushes to pull the unconscious Nick out, but he is completely unresponsive. Maggie cries as she performs CPR, but to no avail. Suddenly, the car moves and Alice 2 appears to be on fire as her voice echoes through the speakers. She climbs on top of Maggie and begins to strangle her while removing a piece of metal from her body. As she prepares to stab her, Nick hits Alice with the car bumper. Alice drops the piece of metal to stop her and Maggie grabs it to stab her in the face, finally silencing her. The couple reunites as the other Sims wake up around them. The next day, everyone feels better after treatment and is able to go home together as a family. Meanwhile, the sim company investigates the repair shop and when the power is turned back on, they find a corrupted code on the screen. The inspector wants to destroy everything, but at that moment his sim assistant crashes and the computer says download while another Alice model opens her eyes. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, leave a comment about your favorite movie, and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.